just a little bit about how this is going to work today. We've invited each Jasmine and Korbinian to speak for about 15 minutes. Jasmine will speak first, followed by Korbinian, and then we'll have kind of an open dialogue between them. After that, we will open it up for questions and kind of see where it goes from there. So I think we should, in the interest of time, get started. As we come to the Q&A section a little bit later, we will just have you ask your questions in the chat window, or kind of acknowledge yourself in the chat window so that we're able to have you give the next question, because it's difficult to have people line up at a mic at this particular moment. So I've made both Jasmine and Korbinian co-hosts on this call. Hopefully that should work fine as far as them being able to share their screen. No one else will be able to share their screen during the call. We just ask that everyone else keep their mic muted, and you are welcome to have your screen off or on during this. I don't know if it will kind of introduce lag if more people have their video on. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce Jasmine Ma. Jasmine is an associate professor of math education in teaching and learning at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at New York University. Jasmine's work uses ethnographic, microethnographic, and experimental designs to better understand how students make sense of math in the everyday world. My particular excitement about bringing Jasmine in for this presentation is that she often extends beyond what developmental and cognitive psychologists think about, extending her work beyond kind of laboratory and classroom settings to where students experience math in their bodies in the moment to moment, thinking about places like skate parks and marching bands and how they use math in their everyday movements. I was lucky enough to be able to take a class with Jasmine at NYU, which has completely transformed the way that I think about math cognition and math education. I could go on and on about it, but in the interest of time, I will let Jasmine tell you about her work.
Thanks, Andy. It's really cool when your doctoral students go on and become real people. So this is really fun. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to you guys for hopefully generously hearing my perspective. It might be kind of odd for some of you. I also have to apologize. My daughter is in a class behind me, and so you might hear her talking about the book that they're reading occasionally. It's just sort of New York City life. Okay, so I'm going to try and do this. Did that work the way I expected? So I think you're looking at a screen full of animated GIFs. All right, cool. So this GIF set is something that I often show when I do a first talk on embodied mathematics cognition. It's created from the TV show Elementary, which is a modern day take on Sherlock Holmes. Lucy Liu plays Watson, Johnny Lee Miller plays Sherlock. The Shortland guy is named Harlan Empel, and he's a mathematician that Sherlock regularly consults with. And I like this scene because of how it's supposed to be funny. The shared assumption is that Harlan's body's proximity to the numbers is clearly a quirk of this guy, this math genius, but it doesn't actually, obviously, have anything to do with his mathematical ability. However, Sherlock delivers the explanation for Harlan's shirtlessness without a hint of irony, then tops us off with the expectation that Harlan might feel the need to strip all the way down, and not only that, but he might sit on the furniture while he's naked. So, kind of gross, right? However, I'm curious about what would happen if we did actually take seriously the notion that human bodies do matter for mathematics and mathematics learning, and how we can really exploit bodies as an integral part of a cognitive system. So mathematics is, after all, a human activity, so why wouldn't bodies matter? Oh, right, I made a title slide, but we're not really gonna look at that. So I think a lot about theory and our implicit and explicit theories of learning. And I just want to give you guys a chance to, like, in 5 seconds, because I'm obviously going to go over time, you could throw into the chat, like, anything that you're thinking about in terms of what does it mean to learn or do mathematics? How does it work? It's hard because you can't just write thinking, right? Okay, I'm going to keep going, but you can keep thinking about that. So I'm just going to do like a quick jaunt through some of the folks that we know have theories about how people think and do mathematics, right? So this is probably a familiar image to you guys. You can shout it out in the chat if you want to. Spoiler alert, it's Piaget. And most of us know him as the father of constructivism. Many of us probably also know him for cognitive stage theory. And cognitive stage theory, one could argue, is embodied, right? Because we start with the importance of sensory motor activity. But of course, then at the end of the day, what's the end goal of stage theory? Abstract thought. Okay. What else? Does anybody know who this guy is? That's Vygotsky, or a picture of him that I found on the internet. Many of us know him for the zone of proximal development. Some of us know him for cultural activity theory, where he talks about mediation. So there's a sense in which cultural historical activity theory is also embodied, because we really think about not just how language mediates cognition, but also material tools, including bodies, right? But of course, at the end of the day, when we talk about cultural historical theory, we're still talking about how we internalize cognitive concepts. One more. This may be less familiar. This is from linguistic anthropology, but George Lakoff and Rafael Nunez are some of the most sort of widely cited in mathematics embodiment. And they argue something called a conceptual metaphor. So perceptual experiences produce metaphors for us to understand mathematics. So like, if we know about walking up a hill, then we can talk about how curves of functions rise, right? They're not actually rising, they're not going anywhere, but our embodied feeling of going up a hill might help us understand the increasing rate of the increase of a parabola, right? But of course, at the end of the day, what these conceptual metaphors do for people account for abstract thought. So we're now back in the head. So here is Jan Nesbor's take on how we bring everything back to individual cognition. Jan Nesbor is a sort of an educational anthropologist. Kids are taught to control and regulate their bodies in ways acceptable to adults. But more important, as kids grow up, the body ceases to be acknowledged as a primary tool for mediating relations with the world. It never vanishes, of course, but it is devalued in importance and replaced by language literacy and other forms of communication. Kids' experiences begin to take place in abstract spaces defined by written texts and media representation. So if you think about children's experiences in schooling from preschool, where they're like on the rug and playing with stuff and like, you know, pinching each other, to when we get to whatever it is we're doing here, like, which is even more extreme, but we're all sitting in chairs, staring at screens, listening to my words and reading my texts, right? Kevin Leander, who's a literacy professor at Vanderbilt University, has this to say about it. He's talking about vocabulary, but I think we can apply this across disciplines. The material scale of vocabulary study is indexed not only in the classroom, but also at a more micro level in the activity and artifacts related to the desktop. In other words, paper, textbook, pen, and individual person. Student work does not simply occur on the individual desktop, rather desk work contributes to a spatialized meaning of schooled activity and schooled identity. In sum, a brief discussion of vocabulary study is suggestive of some of the ways in which modal school practices create daily embodied routines, which are judged as more or less competent performances, right? So that's a pretty narrow way of understanding human competency. Is that okay for how we treat our young people? Obviously, my argument is no. There's a lot of people who think it's important to treat young people this way. So I'm hoping to make an argument for a more expanded view of competent performances, competent cognitive mathematical performances. All right, so here's one possibility. Ed Hutchins is a cognitive scientist at UCSD. He is attributed with developing the idea of distributed cognition, and he argues that cognitive science made a fundamental category error when it mistook the properties of a person in interaction with the social and material world for the cognitive properties of whatever is inside the person. So he makes this argument, and I'm basically just gonna pull a couple quotes from his very old article, I think it's from 1991, called How a Cockpit Remembers Its Speeds. But we're still talking here about the issues that are important to cognitive science. We're talking about how information is represented in a cognitive system. We're talking about how representations are transformed or combined and propagated across the system. We're still talking about how what knowledge structures are and the processes that operate on them. However, he's arguing these distributed systems that include a social and material world have properties of their own that aren't accounted for when studying individuals. Okay, so that's going to be a piece of the theoretical framing I want to take up today. The other is about representations. I think most people will agree that representations are pretty important to the mathematics that we do today. So I'll give you another 15 seconds to think about what are students asked to represent in mathematics classrooms. In other words, what's the mathematical relationship or operation or idea? And what representations are students using when they're in classrooms? What do we expect them to use? Equations, diagrams, pretty common. Hands, bodies. Often hands more often than bodies, the rest of the body, but that's numerical relations, symbols. All right, so I want to think about representations in a very particular way, and I'm going to start with the idea of infrastructure. So Lee Starr argued that infrastructure is actually really important to study. So Lee Starr was in STS, Science, Technology, and Society Studies. So infrastructure is something upon which something else runs or operates, such as railroad tracks upon which railroad cars run, like cell towers for making cell phone calls. I don't know if people make calls anymore, but infrastructure is typically invisible to those who use it, but not for those who must work with it. So this is an example of undersea cables. The reason that we can talk to each other right now is there's this huge network of cables that just lie on the ocean floor. But when we're on the Zoom call together, we're not thinking about those cables. They're invisible to us. We're thinking about the content of our talk and our interaction. In fact, in order for it to work, it has to remain invisible to us. Otherwise, we're going to be too busy thinking about those cables to think about embodied mathematical cognition. I just sort of messed with us there by accident. But also, it can't be invisible to everybody, right? Somebody has to maintain those cables. So those are the object of those people's work, but that's their business. It's not ours. Thanks to them. Okay, but if infrastructure breaks, trouble propagates across different activity systems. So this is a picture of the New York City subway map. In 2014, all of downtown Manhattan and much of Brooklyn lost power, which meant that the subway system was shut down. So when people stop being able to be transported across New York City, it's not just the subway system that has trouble, right? Suddenly, we can't run our businesses. Suddenly, people can't get to their jobs. Suddenly, we can't shop. Right? So if you think about all the different activity systems that depend on the infrastructure of the subway system, it's not just the subway that's in trouble when it's broken. Similarly, when new infrastructure is introduced, systems also must change. So this is, I don't know if you guys remember Futurama, but so if we have these people air tube transporters, right? Like that's going to change systems too. Like, how do you carry your groceries? Like, we can't have Costco anymore. Sorry, that's a US reference. We can't, it's like hard to travel together in families, right? Like, what's your 3-year-old doing in this thing? Okay. So what does it have to do with representations? Well, Jim Caput argued that representational infrastructure is really important to doing and learning mathematics. Notational systems are one kind of representational infrastructure. So if you look at 1 + 2 + 3 + 4, so on, that's one form of notational system. But if you look at the summation notational system, that has really different affordances and constraints, as does the algebraic notation, right? That makes us understand very differently the idea of summation of integers. Both representational infrastructure itself, the notation in this case, and the technologies by which it is rendered, so paper and pencil or computer algebra system, for example, matters for both understanding and problem solving. So for learners, representational infrastructure can be both a tool for learning and an object of learning. So remember the importance of infrastructure remaining invisible so that we can carry on our business. Well, for learners, notation, they're in the middle of learning it. It's not invisible to them. And so they're trying to learn that at the same time that they're trying to use it. How does an algebraic expression like this support the learning of why you can produce this formula for the summation of integers? So it turns out that the most powerful representational infrastructure for doing mathematics, such as algebraic notation, is not necessarily the most powerful representational infrastructure for learning mathematical ideas. So this representation is not a conventional mathematical representation, nor is it like sort of notation that's useful for doing algebra. But at the same time, you can look at it in a glance and suddenly understand why that expression is equivalent to that, to the other expression, right? Okay. So I'm going to do a really short piece of empirical analysis just to put these ideas into play and just ask a couple questions. Andy, am I like using up way too much time right here?
Go for it.
Okay, I think I have like 6 more minutes. So this data comes from actually my dissertation study like 15 years ago or something like that at Vanderbilt University. So I just want to thank the folks who were involved in both the design of the study, the design of the design experiment, and the collection of data and the analysis. So this was our research team back at Vanderbilt. The design is called walking scale geometry. So students draw, and I put that in quotation marks because drawing on pencil and paper is a really different thing. There's different representational infrastructure for drawing when you're at walking scale. So they construct and manipulate figures with everyday materials at large, and in this case on a soccer field, large scale, to solve geometric problems. In this case, we are going to be in a middle school. And really one of the ideas of walking scale geometry is to try to deliberately engage students' whole bodies in interaction with each other, because we wanted to see what that could mean for mathematics and for learning. I'm not going to spend any time on methods, but I invite you to ask me about them if you want. But just so you know, it's a design-based research study. We used methods from the construction of grounded theory and iterate between ethnographic and microethnographic methods. It's a completely qualitative study. And I want to emphasize it's an interpretive research method study. Okay, so here's the case. This is Harry on the far left, Dean holding one end of this rope, Eddie holding the other end of the rope, and Ben, who's standing here. I've sort of highlighted the rope for you. They're just starting the walking scale geometry activity. So this is the very first one. They've been asked to make a line segment that's twice the length of one of their bodies. They can choose who they use. So they've done that using Dean's body. They haven't cut off their line segment from the larger coil of rope, so you can see the rest of it sort of lying here behind Eddie and Ben. So they're fixing the length of the rope by just holding it really carefully. So you can see Eddie's got his hand here on the rope, and he's holding it to make sure they don't lose that length. And what they're doing now is they're waiting for somebody to come take a picture before they do the next activity. And the reason that we needed to get a picture, ironically, we couldn't figure out a way to discuss everyone's strategies without just going back inside and sitting down at their individual desks and projecting these images. And so unfortunately, that's what we did. That's a problem we're working on. So they're waiting for somebody to come take a picture. I think it's me. And while they wait, they decide they're gonna try and play some jump rope. They've got a rope, they've got one person standing at each end. It made perfect sense to them to play some jump rope. But at the same time, remember, they have this problem where they're actively working to try and maintain the length of their line segment, because it's gotta be 2 times the length of Dean, or one of them, they chose Dean. Okay, so this is about 30 seconds.
You have to lay down?
No, bring it out more. No, we can't lose height. Yeah. They're gonna bring the camera, I think.
Here, hold it. Let me try.
Yeah, playing with my...
You guys have like two. Oh, yeah.
We should have done you guys a second longer. Hold it here, hold this right here.
I wish we could use scissors, just be close together. Yeah, like that. Ow!
Okay, that's it. So a couple of things that I want to point out really quickly here. Bodies get produced in very particular ways in the course of engaging in walking scale geometry. So bodies become part of the representational infrastructure here. Without their bodies, they cannot make the line segment for lots of reasons. In one sense, the height of individuals becomes sort of standardized units of measure, right? And also, bodies need to maintain the line segment. In fact, when they're closer together, it's not a line segment anymore, right? They got to pull back in order to make it taut, to make it a line segment. Wait, what happened? I don't know, something's acting funny, sorry. So bodies are also being used for fixing representation. So when Eddie makes the trade-off because he wants to go jump rope, he's got to pretty carefully remember where that spot was so that Dean can come take it from him before he can go and take his turn. At the same time, mathematics is produced in a particular way in the course of walking scale geometry, because remember, when representational infrastructure changes, so does the content of mathematics and how we learn mathematics. So in this case, mathematics has to be negotiated flexibly in order to let them incorporate the play that they're determined to do. So when Harry says, no, bring it out more, he's talking about the distance that they maintain between their two bodies in terms of what's a jumpable rope versus what was their line segment. Eddie argues we can't lose Dean's height. Are we going to lose Dean's height if we either contract or expand? They're going to bring the camera. So he's still in this world where there's a concern about the mathematical activity as opposed to the play activity. Also, the mathematics that gets produced demands embodied engagements, right? They need the bodies in order for the mathematics to occur. And what's really interesting here is that they realize, hey, if we want to jump rope, Dean is too short. We should use Harry instead so that our rope is longer, because these guys think it's because the rope is too short that they can't jump rope. Like, I didn't have the heart to tell them, like, you guys are actually just really bad at this. But that's okay. That's not the point. Okay. So a couple of points that I want to make. First, walking scale geometry demanded the rebuilding of representational infrastructure and therefore new forms of representation. So new material arrangements highlighted particular mathematical relationships. Manipulation and assembly of parts of figures did not resemble what we call construction activity at paper scale. So in other words, what counts as mathematics and what it means to learn mathematics has changed. Second point, the group strategy was developed in activity, coordinated in unfolding interaction, dominated by coordinated whole body material actions, and supported by talk. So both mathematics and play was distributed across the social and physical collective of the group, right? That bigger cognitive system that Hutchins was talking about. And at the intersection of geometry and jumping rope, students exploited mathematical properties of their representational infrastructure in the service of their interacting emerging goals. So I chose this episode because the mathematics is uncomplicated, so I didn't have to go too deeply into it, but because I think that the students' spontaneous, multi-party, whole-bodied play is important in shaping their mathematical activity and vice versa. The particular engagements of bodies and of these particular bodies determined how both the mathematics and the play emerged at the same time, right? Those are interacting activities. So I think that's really important because they're very particular bodies and it's very particular activity that emerges. So to be just really clear, what I'm arguing against here is standardization or looking for universals. I think the particularity is what's really important when it comes to humans and human bodies. Okay, so to bring it back out, some questions to consider. This was a tiny case to ground some thinking about multiple whole bodies and interaction in relation to mathematical activity. In general, I think it's important to consider some of these things. So for the study of how people learn mathematics, what does our unit of analysis illuminate and what does it hide? What assumptions does it make about what is or should be quote unquote universal, or worse, what looks like noise and therefore not worth considering? For liberating designs for learning mathematics, if you're trying to make something for youth, what do we assume about their bodies? What do we assume about what competent bodies look like in competent performances, embodied routines, right? As Kevin Leander was saying. And then there's a question of for whom does this disembodied mathematics that is rampant in modern Western society, for whom is that? Who does that benefit? I would argue it's those with bodies that at least appear to conform to dominant normative standards, whose bodies are not at issue in everyday life or in educational settings. I would argue that it's also for those with individual cognitive systems that appear to conform to dominant and normative standards. So how do we change that? That's it.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm sure I can see several people applauding, though we can't hear it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to move real quickly to Korbinian. And just so everyone is aware, we will probably minimize the discussion between Jasmine and Korbinian in favor of questions so that we can get a chance to hear from the group at large. No problem, Jasmine apologizes for the length. I thought it was incredibly interesting, so that's why I didn't cut you off, and I know that this is our first time, so we can play with the format a little bit as we go. So Korbinian Moeller is a professor of mathematical cognition at the newly established Mathematical Education Center at Loughborough University. Korbinian uses behavioral and neural methods to understand the cognitive underpinnings of numerical skills, and he takes a multidimensional approach to the acquisition of mathematical skills, focusing, there goes my notes, focusing on aspects of numeracy that underlie children's mathematical achievement. I've been supremely lucky to be able to work with Korbinian in the past. He is one of my first and longest serving collaborators, so I'm so excited to be able to bring him in today about his work on finger counting, which I will admit I'm totally unfamiliar with because this is not what we've collaborated on in the past. But please join me in welcoming Korbinian.
Yeah, hello Andy, and welcome everyone to my presentation. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present some of my research, some of our research, because it's not what I did on my own. And you already mentioned I only recently moved to Loughborough University. So most of the work, or almost all the work that I present today has been done in Tübingen, and this is why I choose the greenish Tübingen Wissenschaftscampus Tübingen layout. Actually, my move to Loughborough was so recently that I haven't been there yet due to the corona circumstances. So we will see. Yes, so my talk is called Grasping Numbers, and I want to talk about finger-based representations in numerical development. And basically, fingers and numbers seem to be associated. So, and there are a lot of examples for this. And one is that basically in all cultures, people seem to use their fingers for counting. So there is only, as far as I know, only one paper describing an Australian Aborigine tribe who does not do finger counting. And even adults may, at some circumstances, resort to finger counting. So if you order 3 beers, for instance, at the bar, but you can also think of, like, if I ask you, you will stay in another city from Thursday to Tuesday, how many nights do you have to book at the hotel? So this is a typical example where a lot of people turn to their fingers. The association for fingers and between fingers and numbers can be observed in many different ways. For instance, on a behavioral level, finger sensory motor skills have been found to predict numerical abilities in preschool children. And furthermore, number processing has been shown to be facilitated by either observing or reproducing canonical finger patterns. That is, the mere act of stretching out fingers, usually used for counting, helps. And finally, on a neuropsychological level, transcranial magnetic stimulation of a parietal region called the angular gyrus has been found to disrupt both number processing and finger representations. So basically, after the research is placed or induced something called a virtual lesion to the angular gyrus, people were no longer were impaired in answering questions like, which finger of your hand did I touch? And also, is the number that I just presented to you smaller or larger than 5? And taken together, this is evidence for an association of fingers and numbers, which is quite compelling so far. What I want to present now is more or less borrowed from a recent presentation of a PhD student of mine, Roberta Barocas, who did her PhD, or who is still doing her PhD on the association between fingers and numbers. And she pursued the research questions of whether finger use causes learning of numerical concepts. So is it something really helpful in the sense that we should train this to children, or should teach this? And do finger sensory motor skills predict numerical abilities beyond the influence of the main general variables like vocabulary, for instance, in smaller children? And I want to present data on the association between fingers and numbers, starting with a literature review that we did, and then going to longitudinal studies, and finally present 2 intervention to training studies that we did, and be able to draw causal conclusions on this. Basically, we did a literature review looking into the association between finger gnosis, fine motor skills, and numerical abilities. As I've already mentioned, there is plenty of evidence showing that there is an association. So children at the end of kindergarten, for instance, who are better in differentiating their fingers. So if you touch a finger and then ask them, which finger did I touch? Then those children who are better in identifying the touched finger are then better in math like a year later. And the same was found for fine motor skills. So there seems to be something. And we did this literature review and found that by using a P-curve analysis, we found that there is evidential value that both finger gnosis and fine motor skills are associated to numerical abilities. And additionally, well, not additionally, but however, we also found that effect sizes, especially for the association of finger gnosis and numerical abilities, is quite small. So usually you find significant influences, but they only account for like 2 or 3% of variance. It's not that much. What we also did in this review, there are different hypotheses where this association comes from. The functional hypothesis basically says that we use fingers for representing numbers, counting, initial calculations and stuff, and therefore the association emerges. The redeployment hypothesis says basically that numbers somehow sneaked into neural circuits in the brain that, like, and then the finger base, the finger circuits of the brain, because it was handy, right? So there's also individualizing stuff going on there, and this is why this association exists. We argue that there is evidence for the redeployment hypothesis. There is also evidence for the functional hypothesis. Our take on this is that it may be a combination, right? So there might be a predisposition to use fingers for representing numbers, but if children do not do it, then these associations might not be that strong as we observe them usually in children who do it. Then I want to turn to empirical evidence that we did. So that we did a longitudinal study. We followed up 55 preschoolers, and we had different tasks for them to do. A finger monitoring task. We asked them, can you show me 3 fingers, for instance? They had to recognize finger patterns. So when we showed them finger patterns, they should say how many fingers do you see there. And we also had to perform a event task to assess their cardinality understanding. We also did a task on quantifiers, some, many, a few, and so to check their understanding of these. We tested them at the age of almost 4 years, and then another 2 times 1 year, with 1 year in between, basically. What we found, or what we did, is we did a regression analysis predicting cardinality understanding at T3, so at the last time point, by finger monitoring, finger pattern recognition, skills, given task, and quantify understanding. And in the first model, we included vocabulary, given, of performance of the children, and we did not find any of these variables predicting cardinality understanding at the last time point significantly. And in the second model, we then inserted the finger-based variables, and we found that basically finger monitoring was the only significant predictor for cardinality understanding 2 years after the first testing. And this is interesting because because we also included performance on the cardinality task from the time point on which we also assessed finger monitoring and finger counting. So basically, this indicates that on the long run, finger-based representations seem to be important, seem to be predictive of future numerical abilities of children. Yes, and before I come to the intervention studies, I want to say that we try to include finger-based representations or incorporate finger-based representations in a model of numerical development. We used the model by Krajewski and Schneider from 2009, which basically differentiates between 3 levels. On the most basic level is a counting level. Children need to learn to count. On the next level, they need to become aware of quantitative meaning conveyed by numbers, by number words, because in the beginning, children may just recite the number word sequence without any specific knowing of the number of the magnitude that is conveyed. And on the third level, it becomes important that they understand that larger numbers can be decomposed into smaller numbers, and based on this, they start performing their initial calculations. And we argue that all of these 3 levels can be supported by fingers. So basically, if you use your fingers to count 1, 2, 3, 4, this helps you to keep track of the counting sequence, because we all usually stretch out fingers in the same order all the time, as we have to name number words and so on. Interestingly, it also helps, or importantly, it also helps for cardinality understanding, because this, what we do is cardinalized counting in a way. So in the sense, you always see the magnitude of the number that you have just counted. And you can also think of composition, decomposition stuff that you can do with fingers, or convey with fingers. 5 can be separated into 2 and 3 and so on. So this is where we started from when developing a training. And the first idea that we had is to develop a training, an app-based training, so children had to do numerical tasks on counting, on cardinality understanding, and part-whole relations on an iPad, and to indicate the specific number, they had to put down the respective number of fingers. And on the first level of counting, they had to put 3 fingers in succession, so one finger after the other on the tablet. The tablet recognized this. On the second level, it was like putting down fingers simultaneously to be recognized by the tablet. And on the last level, it was like 1 plus 2 is 3. So this is how we tried to convey this. Basically, this was embedded in a story of a small alien that was stranded with a spaceship on Earth and has no hands, so children have to help him get his rocket refueled to get home to his home planet. We did a training study where the pre-test with about 160 children, and they had 3 different groups. One group trained with the app, one did a control training, an established training, Mengen, Zell, and Zahlen. And there was a waiting list control group, and then we had the post-test. The results are still preliminary, but however, it seems so that all children overall, they increased their performance from pre to post-test. However, if we look into the specific groups, then yeah, so the control training did work, as to be expected, because it was an evaluated numerical training for kindergartners, but our training was not better than the waiting list control. So this was in kindergarten. Children were aged 3 to 6, and to show you that fingers can be helpful, I will present data from a second intervention study. We did this in 1st grade, so not in kindergarten, but in 1st grade. And we also had an intervention group, we had a control group, we did a pre-test, and then the intervention group got a training over the entire 1st grade, 18 sessions of about half an hour, integrated into math instructions, math classes, so they did not get more instruction, but just part of it was replaced. And a post-test by the end of 1st grade, a follow-up test in the middle of 2nd grade. And what did we test them on? We tested them on addition and subtraction and on number line estimation. The training was again oriented on this model and how finger can help grasping the 3 levels of numerical development, as suggested by Krajewski and Schneider. But we also added a finger gnosis part to the training, so we tried to improve their finger gnosis. And then, okay, we had this counting-based stuff, quantity understanding, and number relations, composition, decomposition. And to make it short, so what we found this time is that children doing the training benefited from it, so they outperformed their peers by the end of 1st grade. And for addition, it was that the benefit got even larger at the follow-up test in the middle of 2nd grade. Similar results were obtained for subtraction. But interestingly, for number line estimation, we did not find any differential effect at all. So our take on this is that it makes perfect sense because you can convey the idea of adding and subtracting using fingers, adding fingers and taking away fingers, but number line estimation, it's hard to convey the idea of a number line by using fingers. So this is why we get this differential effects. So some concluding remarks on this. In our view, fingers are relevant for the development of numerical skills. We have inconsistent results about a potential causal link in terms of the intervention effects were not significant, not beneficial always. And there is also a recent study who also found no beneficial effect of finger-based training in kindergartners. And possible reasons for this is that you need to consider target age. So at which age does it make sense to train children on using their fingers for numbers? And the idea may be that in first grade, children, they have math instruction basically every day. And so if you teach them on using their fingers, they have the opportunity to use this skill each and every day at school, more or less. If you do this in kindergarten, at least in Germany, there is no math instruction in kindergarten. Yeah? So children do not have the opportunity to use it, but they only do this during the training, and they possibly never use it outside the training. Maybe this is a potential confound here. Also, what we found for the app-based training is that the familiarity with touch devices was very heterogeneous in our sample. So a lot of children knew them very well, but another big part of children had never worked with an iPad, for instance, with a tablet. Yeah? So they needed more time to accommodate with using this. And so this will require further research to answer these questions. Yeah, but for the iPad app, for the app-based training, I can at least tell you that most of the children really like the training, and they like the story around it. And so these game-based, app-based training of finger-based numerical representations might be a good idea for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Korbinian. So a couple of quick announcements before we open up for Q&A. I realize there's only now 10 minutes left until noon here, which means it is getting quite late for some of you. A brief reminder that if you are a trainee in the Math, Cognition, and Learning Society, nominations for board positions are open. So feel free to submit to that. Feel free to message the Twitter account for any further questions or ask them in the Slack. We will be sending out a brief survey after this for everyone who attended to get a sense of how this went for people, in part because we are planning to do something like this on an ongoing basis, particularly thinking about ways that we can extend the MCLS conference that obviously is not happening in person in some kind of online format, possibly keeping this time slot or finding one that works better for people. But we were so excited to have so many people who were able to attend today. So if anyone has any questions for Jasmine or for Korbinian or for both of them, please feel free to identify yourself in the chat. And then we'll kind of go in that order for any questions that arise. Tyler, do you want to ask that question aloud?
Sure. Although there's birds in the background. So I was wondering if Korbinian and Jasmine could sort of maybe put their talks into conversation with each other. because I was struck by the very disciplined bodies, like the finger counting that Korbinian was discussing, and the very unruly, undisciplined, almost resistant bodies that Jasmine was talking about. And so, yeah, thinking about those in terms of how they show up in mathematical practice, but also implications for like justice and liberation.
I could start if you're not ready, Korbinian. So there's a fantastic chapter about STEM education and embodiment written by Miwa Takeuchi at University of Calgary and a colleague of hers. And in it, there is a case of a young girl who is a Filipina immigrant to Japan. And she had learned actually a multiplication procedure using her fingers in the Philippines. And then when she moved to Japan, it wasn't a prominent practice in Japan. And also she was in upper elementary school. And so she spent a lot of time using it under her desk. So this became a cause for concern to her Japanese teachers, because why is like I can't remember, to be honest, a fifth grader still using her fingers to count was the narrative of what the problem was. And then they found out it was actually a pretty sophisticated procedure, and it wasn't for adding and subtracting, it was for multiplication, which felt more appropriate to them, right? So there's a sense in which this young girl's body was treated as unruly because of her use of fingers, but it was actually just related to cultural assumptions and practices of where she was. So that's a start, I think.
Yeah, so basically I can only add to this that I don't know how it is in the US or in other countries, but in Germany, using your fingers in math instruction in math classes is not seen as very positive by most of teachers. So they try to prohibit this. And the idea in math education behind this is that this will prevent, or this might prevent, this will prevent, that's their argument, children from developing more abstract representations of numerical meaning. I'm not sure. I would rather argue that it is beneficial to use your fingers. And this is interesting too, if you go back a little bit, so like 50 of, it's always almost 80 years now, there are finger counting routines from the 1930s, 1940s, which have been routinely taught at school, and it worked. So no one would claim that they did not learn how to deal with numbers in the 1930s or 1940s. But this has been abandoned somehow starting with the 1960s, and at least in Germany, today it's the case that using your fingers is not a good idea.
Thank you both. I also always think it's really interesting to think about the kind of cases of emergent sign language, and I know Marie Coppola at the University of Connecticut has done some really interesting work on the emergence of number systems in Nicaraguan Sign Language as Nicaraguan Sign Language emerged in the last 50 years or so, and seeing how as essentially a manual language has evolved, how number and numerical representation has evolved along with it. Morgan, would you like to ask that aloud?
Andrew, I was just wondering, I found both these presentations so interesting, and I was wondering if either of you would like to speak to the application of this research in terms of child ability to acquire these numeric concepts, especially when that acquisition might be interrupted by like adverse child experiences or disability, especially like if we're thinking about symbolic learning through sign language.
Maybe I can start on this. It is interesting. So as regards fingers, there is a description of a girl who was born without hands. And she, when she started school, then she had some prosthesis, and she started counting the fingers of her prosthesis without any instruction. So there seems to be something. And also I met when I was on a research visit in Brazil, I met a girl, she also had some physical disabilities, so her hands were not fully developed, and also her feet. But she also said that using the 2 toes, counting the 2 toes and 5 fingers that she has helped her a lot in acquiring numerical meaning. So I think it's not necessary to have like 10 fingers to use your fingers properly in a very common sense, or in the most common habit for counting or calculation. So this can be done in very different ways.
I think from my perspective, Morgan, I would turn the question on its head. So from the very little I know about disability studies from some really smart doctoral students I have, I'm thinking about disability as not what's natural and as ability versus disability, but what sort of like are the diversity of abilities that are out there, right? So what we count as disability is only because we have dominant normative views of what counts as mathematics and what learning should look like, right? And what if the end point is some sort of cognitive representational structure as abstraction that we've developed actually by looking at normative bodies, well then of course we're going to count particular populations as disabled, right? But if we do some grounded studies of how diverse folks, even if it's not average or the majority of folks, do and learn, like let's say quantitative reasoning, we might have different ways of conceptualizing, oh yeah, that's still numerical reasoning, even if it's not the end point of, you know, some of what we assume to be, yes, that's the right way to count, or that counting got acquired in that sense, right? And so what Hutchins would say, you can get away from the acquisition language if you're looking at cognitive systems that stretch across socio-technical systems, because like if the endpoint is numerical reasoning, if we're only looking at individuals, you might count something as a disability. If we're looking across, if you're looking at a distributed system, you might call it something very different.
Thank you both so much. I think we have another question. Do you want to ask the question aloud? I seem to have lost him, but I think this is a really interesting question that came up in the chat. Is kind of what about, oh, sorry.
Sorry. I didn't hear you before. So thank you for a very good discussion today. I'm come from Indonesia, and this is my experience when I'm working with the children. So using the fingers while counting. And some of the children I work with were depend too much on the fingers, and it becomes difficult to help them making sense of the calculation itself. For instance, when we have 2 times 3, then they count it by 3 plus 3 using their fingers, and when it comes to 3 times 3, they start again from 3 plus 3 plus 3 again. And if you go further, like 4 times 3, then they will start again with 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 from the very beginning, not making the relation between what it's mean by 2 times 3 and 3 times 3 and 4 times 3, etc. Is that the negative effect of using fingers as a method to counting, or do you experience something similar like that? Thank you.
Yeah, so Yeah, so this is one argument. This is often made by colleagues from math education, that by you allowing children to use their fingers for initial calculations, that you provoke more or less these kinds of counting strategies that you just describe, and which are not sensible. Because this is as numbers grow larger, this is very error prone and time consuming and stuff. Just imagine if when children move on from first to second grade and the number range is extended to 100, and adding and subtracting within this number range, it's no use using your fingers anymore. So usually my impression always was that children are very good in figuring out what is the most efficient strategy to solve a task. And if they encounter that it is time consuming, it is effortful to do this, then after some time they will switch to a more convenient, to another strategy. If this does not happen until third grade or something, then I think it is worth looking into whether there is a more severe issue with numbers there.
I think from a representational infrastructure point of view, this is completely sensible, right? So like fingers are useful representational infrastructure for particular kinds of numeracy. They're very bad for grouping because they're attached to your palms, right? So like you can compose and decompose, but grouping and regrouping can get pretty complicated or painful fast. So you know, when we think about things like strategic competency, using the right kinds of tools for particular kinds of problems, part of the flexibility of bodies, for me, is not, hey, you should use this body part to do that, and tell students to proceduralize body parts. It's to make meaning, because as my doctoral advisor always said, we've been living in these meat packages all our life. We experience the world through our meat packages, and we have ways of making sense of the world with our, he likes to be funny, he means our bodies, right? And so like, let people make sense of their bodies in the ways that are sensible to them, rather than telling them, proceduralizing parts of your body the ways that we might proceduralize algebraic notation, for example, right? So that's a sort of infrastructure take on that.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question if someone wants to ask. I realize it's getting on 6 o'clock on a Friday evening for Korbinian. Surprised he hasn't opened a beer on camera yet. All right, well, thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciated all of your fantastic questions. Thank you so much to Jasmine and Korbinian for being our inaugural speakers. And I'm so excited to be able to continue these conversations in the future. And everyone have a fantastic Friday. Thanks, everyone.